Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Lou Collins and I've got another card for you today using this Pink Ink Designs a Stitch in Time stamp set. It's absolutely beautiful. Actually, this card looks really layered, but it's not. It's actually quite flat. There's a few layers in there, but not too much at all. It's all about building dimension into one layer, and we're going to be doing that. I'll run you through all the techniques. You can find this stamp set at craftstash.co.uk and I will link it in the comments for you. It's a beautiful stamp, a really large stamp, very, very detailed, so it's worth getting hold of. So the first thing I did was stamp this sewing machine onto white cardstock, thin white cardstock, and I've cut it out there. So I've gone around the edge with scissors and the inside bit with a craft knife on a glass mat. I haven't gone around all the swirls, I've left those pieces out here, just going around the main detail. So this is what it looks like. It's so stunning, absolutely beautiful. There's so much detail in there. Then what I've done is I've taken the mask that we've just created and laid it onto my cardstock that I want to start creating my first layer on. I've got blending tools here. I'm using brushes today rather than foam, and I've chosen my colour palette. So these are actually some blues and greens from Ranger Distress inks. I don't think I've got any oxides in here today, just the inks. So I'm going around in circles with the green first of all, and then I'm going to move on to different blues and turquoises, just switching the colour as I work around the sewing machine there. So blending over the mask, holding it still. Now, if you don't want to hold it still, if you don't want to get messy fingers, if you want to make sure it doesn't move, you can use a repositionable spray adhesive. That way you know it's going to stay down tacky. I just prefer, if I can, to hold it still. It's quite a large mask, so I've got plenty of area to be doing that. So just working my way all the way around, bringing in turquoises as well, blending the colours. So I'm using really small circles here with my brush. These are just some makeup brushes that I bought off, I think it was Amazon, and they work really well with the Distress inks. Making sure you go inside the sewing machine as well. So the next stage is to then re-stamp that image over where you've just inked into the white space. I had to cut my cardstock down a little bit to fit the load and fold. So just pressing that down really hard. I'm using a VersaFine, black VersaFine. It's my favourite ink to use for detail stamping. So I'm just positioning the stamp here. I've not got any ink on there at the moment, so just making sure it's in the right place. And then I'm going to tack down my card to the stamping block there to make sure it doesn't move, and then ink up the stamp. Now this is a really large stamp, so you will need a large platform, a large load and fold, or a massive acrylic block if that's what you prefer to use. So that's all inked, got all the detail caught with ink there. So now to just make sure that's still stuck down and fold and press that down into the white space. I'm just looking through the clear acrylic here to make sure that's definitely lined up before I press it down, and then really press it down well, because this is such a large stamp. Even with a load and fold or a stamping platform or something, it can be a little bit harder to keep the paper still inside it. Obviously we're not using magnets or anything here because this is just acrylic plastic. So just releasing that and making sure that has all stamped beautifully. I love this design. Now you can stop here if you want to. It's a really, really pretty effect, and it's one layer. So if you want to stop here, you absolutely can. Look at the detail in that stamp. But I'm going to take it a step further now, and I'm going to ink my background. I've just sped this up for you, making sure you're filling in all the white space around the edge there. Obviously we don't need our mask in place to do these bits, using those same colours as I did before. So now I just want to distress that inked background just a little bit. So I'm spritzing a little bit of water. Because these are distress inks, this will mottle the background. It will react with the ink. Putting a few larger droplets on with my fingers there as well. I give that about 10 seconds or so to sit on the paper. It usually depends on the sort of paper you're using. Then I mop up the excess water with a piece of kitchen towel, just pressing it down, letting it absorb into the kitchen towel, and that will lift up some of the colour, and you'll get like these raindrop watermark look on the background there in all the ink colours, as you can see. So now I want to add some more distressing to the background. I'm going to do that with, I've got a really old stamp here. I can't even remember who they're from. It's sort of got text and numbers in it, quite a vintage style. And I'm using it without a block because I just want to use small areas of it to give it a distressed look. Holding the clear stamp in my fingers and curving it round so I can be really accurate with the part that I'm stamping, and I'm doing second and third impressions with this using just a little bit of VersaFine. At times I'm dabbing off if I think I've put too much ink on the stamp, and you'll be able to see there you can just get some nice varying degrees of detail in the background there, just going over all that inking. Just trimming this down now so that it will fit my card base. I've got a nice pattern strip there that I can use for another project. And then I'm going to matte and layer this onto black. That will really help that black stamping pop out. So now I'm taking some nesting dies. These are hexagons. I chose hexagons because they reminded me of like patchwork quilt that you'd use if you were sewing, or make if you were sewing. So yeah, you could use circles, you could use squares, diamonds, whatever you have at home already. You could hang cut these, but certainly if you have nesting dies and you have quite small ones, these are much easier to use. So I'm just randomly placing those down in the background with a bit of washi tape, and I've just cut those out there using my small die cutting machine. In fact, I still use my Cuttlebug sometimes. It's still running after about 10 years. Releasing these, but make sure you keep the paper that's in the die because we are going to reuse those bits later. And if I pop this on that black background, you'll see where those shapes are. Now that's quite bold. I want to just distress that a little bit more and add some detail and texture into the black areas where the patchwork shapes are. So just masking off the borders so that I don't add any detail to those, just on the edge there. And then I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to just gently draw around each of the shapes there, so that I can see when I take my front panel away whereabouts I can actually see through to the cardstock. Otherwise you're just working with ink and embossing powder in areas that won't be seen. So I say going around the edge, and again on the top corner I also need to mask off the edges. I'm going to use the same masking tape or washi tape that I was using on my dies. Reuse everything, don't throw anything away, and just mask off those borders. Then I'm going to take the same stamp that I used in the background, and I'm going to use an embossing ink this time, using the same technique as well. So curving that stamp so that I'm just getting small areas, pressing down onto the cardstock where I drew those hexagons. So just working where we're actually going to be seeing through the front panel. I did make a mistake here. I didn't use my anti-static bag on my cardstock before I started doing this, so I do get a lot of excess embossing powder sticking to areas I don't want them to, but it's fine, I fixed it. I'll tell you that in a moment. So I'm using a sizzix opaque embossing powder here, this beautiful green. This comes from a set with Christmas colours in. I absolutely love it on the black. It looks like a lime green. This is where you can really see that I've got powder where I didn't want it. It's smudged a little bit, not too clear. Now I tried to tap off as much excess as possible by flicking the back, and if you're really brave you can shake your cardstock around like so. That was fine. I wanted a distressed look, so then I just needed to heat set those. So once they're all heat set, you can go back in and check what that looks like with your panel over the top. Make sure you've got everything filled in that you want filled in with the embossing, and that just adds to another layer of texture there. So the next thing to do is start placing back in random places those die cuts that came out of our dies earlier, because we've got some beautiful colour and texture in them. It's a shame not to use them. To make them really stand out, once we've got our positioning for each of them, and I'm bringing some of them down lower because I don't have any peek through apertures lower down on the card, I'm actually going to go around all of the edges using a black distress ink. Okay, so I'm going to blend into the edges of these die cuts. I'm actually going to use a foam blender because a brush is very gentle and you get a very delicate line. I want quite a harsh line on these so they can really be seen. So you just see I'm blending the edges of these quite roughly. I'm not being too precise with them, but this will just help to make them pop, so when you see them on the card against everything else, they're still going to stand out. We'll accentuate this even further by adding some foam tape when we put our card together in the end. So now starting to construct everything, foam tape, black foam tape between the black layer and that first panel. Already that looks like there's so many layers on there, but actually you've just got the two, and then some other foam pieces between your hexagons and the top layer. So in total there's 3 layers here. You can absolutely glue these down with a wet glue because you've inked around the edges. They're going to stand out anyway, but I do like that extra dimension. This is going to easily go in an envelope without being too squashed, but still have the beautiful texture. So there's the finished card. I just added a sentiment in the end. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. I'll be putting up another Papercraft video and tutorial very, very soon. Take care everybody. Bye bye.